Okay,
we should be set.
ready to go. All right, I got a text from Jason and he's driving back from Grand Junction, so he won't be at the workshop this afternoon, but he will be at the meeting at 6 o'clock. So to start, I'm going to read a written declaration from the chair of the public body pursuant to House Bill 5002 and Utah Code annotated 52-4-207 4A and B. Whereas the Utah Public and Open Meeting Act provides that a public body may convene and conduct an electronic meeting without an anchor location if the chair of the public body makes a written determination that conducting the meeting with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location, states in the written determination the facts upon which the determination is based, and whereas Grand County is a high level of COVID-19 transmission and the Moab City Council meetings required attendance by individuals at higher risk of severe illness from COVID-19, and whereas the health and safety of those in attendance is best served by holding electronic meetings of the council, and whereas the council has demonstrated the ability to effectively conduct public meetings electronically, including providing members of the public means to observe the meetings and provide comments electronically. Now, therefore, I conclude that conducting Moab City Council meetings with an anchor location that is physically accessible for members of the public to attend in person presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. This determination will expire in 30 days. After the day upon which I made the determination, it is possible that circumstance could warrant future determinations, and so I may reissue future written determinations at that time. So with that said, my hope is that we don't have to go 30 days and that we will be able to meet again in public, but we'll take that one step at a time. Things are kind of looking good, but at this point, we're going to continue with electronic meetings as outlined in this determination. So with that, I am going to open the council workshop at 4:04 p.m. And we'll start with Chuck on the past, present, and future of our water system planning.
Mayor, do you mind if I just jump in really quick?
Yeah.
I want to let everyone know that we have Nathan Bracken on the Zoom as well. So Nathan is an attorney with our water attorney provider. He does a lot of legislative work and a lot of policy work too related to water resource planning. So he's here. We talked a lot about some of the initiatives that we've been developing, and we've gotten his feedback and feedback of some others, but he's definitely here for as a resource to you.
Thanks, Carly. I look forward to chatting with all of you.
All right, Chuck.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I've got a presentation I'd like to walk through, talking about our system, our planning, and with that, I'll just jump right into it, see if I can get it on the screen. Share screen. Almost there, here we go. Can you see that? PowerPoint? Okay. So what I've done is put together this PowerPoint. I thought it'd be useful to take a look at from a temporal perspective, both from the past, the present, and the future. And some of this will be higher level items thinking for council, and some of this is nuts and bolts, but it's our water system is composed of all of those as we manage this resource. So with that, history pre-2017. Don't know that much about it because we don't have time to look that much into it, but we all know the city was incorporated in 1902. So we've been around over 120 years. The city developed in fits and spurts. There was an agricultural period, gas and oil period, uranium period, tourism period. There's probably some that are focused on that Tawny may know because of her association with the museum that she put in here as well. But my point of this was that our water system infrastructure developed in spurts over time. Moab is not the master plan community. You know, we're not like one of those communities in other parts of Utah, Arizona, Nevada, where they come in and develop 5 square miles, which is about what our city is, over a matter of 5 years, and all the infrastructure is in place to handle that 5 square miles. Our 5 square miles has developed over the last 120 years, and that's some of, you know, which is like a lot of America. So I'm not saying it's unique, but it's the reason our system is the way that it is in some regards. Over the last 20 years, the city typically used 1,800 to 2,400 acre feet per year of wet water. That's water reported to the state. We're required annually to make reports to Utah Department of Water Rights. Currently, we have about 6,000 acre feet of water rights not being used. And I attribute that to the good work that was done by the staff and councils in the past of, as the city developed and annexed, people would dedicate their water rights over to the city because we're a municipal water provider, and people wouldn't have to rely on the wells in their backyard because the city would provide them with water, one of the advantages of being incorporated. And interestingly, I thought I'd share this. Our oldest water right is 1889. So 15 years, 14 years before we became a city, we have water rights. And those are all tracked. So that's why I thought it was important just hit a couple of highlights about the pre-2017. 2017 to 2021, looking at that 5-year period was the next period of time I wanted to look at in history, just like recent history. Active sources, we have 4 springs, 3 wells. 2 of them are culinary, 1 is primarily irrigation, and then 1 new well, number 12, as council knows, we're working on getting it completed this year. About 52 miles of pipe in the ground. We have 3 1 million gallon storage tanks. Our source protection area for our springs and our wells, where we have certain requirements to protect those sources, is about 34.7 square miles. We updated them 2 years ago. Annual water usage is about 2,000 to 2,400 acre feet per year, with an instantaneous peak of 5,646 gallons per minute. And the reason I just throw that out there is you don't design water systems for an average. That's a useful number. You design them for your peak demand. And typically that's July, the 3rd week in July in Moab is when we have the highest demand for water usage. So our storage tanks in particular are dependent upon that. With known issues, inadequate fire suppression in places, we have an aging system, low circulation and system extremities. It sounds like just getting old. And a budget source is the Water Enterprise Fund. And our fiscal year 21-22 budget's about 1.3 million operating and 7.6 million capital projects. Also in that time frame of 2017-2021, there was a lot going on. The city adopted their first water distribution and storage master plan that was ever done, evaluating our system needs, conditions, and had 17.7 million in capital projects that could be done to bring our system where we think it needs to be. Council adopted new culinary water rates last year for the first time in 20 years in order to fund some of these projects and to maintain our system. And the first thing we've done is we've got a culinary water bond program as part of that water rates. That includes the drilling of the new water supply well 12, about 1.5 million by the time it's built out and online. Begin construction of the Mill Creek water line improvements. That's underway now. Everyone who's driven 400 East and Mill Creek Drive knows that work is ongoing. That's replacing World War II era water line with brand new 12-inch lines. We conducted a facility evaluation study since the bond was approved. with the whole point was just to bring it up to state standards. It wasn't to put any blue ribbons on it. It was just to make it where it needed to be. It's about $2.8 million worth of work that needs to be done there. And we're looking at we've started the prioritization process, working with Levi on that, our Public Works Director. And council will see, as those projects come forward, we go through council for project approval. And then the new water storage tank was in there, which is about a $2.5 million budget. And about half of that is from the bond program. And we're hoping to get the other half through state loans or grants. Also in 2017-21, it was a busy 5 years. Shifting gears now from the physical part of the system, there was some science that was going on, a lot of science. And the part of that was the evaluation of groundwater resources in the Spanish Valley watershed, Grand and San Juan counties, also known as the USGS report. Was a 3-year study that was done by the USGS. They did some field work, they did some modeling and some report writing, and they produced a result for what they thought was availability of groundwater in our valley. Almost concurrently, the city contracted with Hydrologic Systems Analysis, or Dr. Ken Colm's company, and they did a hydrologic and hydrogeologic assessment of resources affecting Moab City Springs and Wells. And it was a larger scale study in that some water balances were done that weren't done in the USGS study, but still the point was to evaluate availability of groundwater. And based upon the results of the 2 studies and further analysis by the Utah Division of Water Rights, the state engineer and myself as your city engineer agree that there's an additional amount of groundwater available for use currently in the range of 1,300 to 3,500 acre feet. That's beyond what we're consuming now. Recall I said that we're consuming about 2,000 to 2,400 acre feet per year. There's about 1,300 to 3,500. And also want to point out that this does not include a detailed analysis of surface water or potential underground storage. Utah is interesting in that way. They don't like to look at, the state doesn't like to look at what's maybe underground. They want to evaluate the budget on what goes in and what goes out. But there is a potential, and we believe there is a certain amount of underground storage. And in the Dr. Combs study, he evaluated some of that. Also in 2017, 2021, we held the first Zoom meeting of the staff level Spanish Valley Regional Water Management Coordination Group, and that was on August 27th of 21. The attendees included management and technical staff from Grand Water and Sewer Services Agency, or GWISA, as we call them, the acronym, San Juan Spanish Valley Special Services District, which is water and sewer in the northern San Juan County in our valley, and the city of Moab. So representatives from those are the 3 largest water providers in the valley by far. Staff has been meeting approximately once a month since then. I think we took a break over the holidays. The group agreed in the fall that there was a need for a valley-wide water utility resource management plan, and a draft scope of work outline was developed and reviewed by the group. Agreement was reached by that coordination group that a consultant was needed to prepare the plan because it's such a large-scale effort that's never been undertaken before by any group within our watershed, and that a memorandum of understanding, or an MOU, was the appropriate vehicle for cost sharing of that plan. Within the MOU, the funding entities were identified as the coalition. And the coalition was those 3 water providers that I identified in the previous slide. And the other collaborating agencies with land use authority. The city of Moab has land use authority, but GWISA does not, and the San Juan Special Services District does not. So Grand and San Juan counties do have land use authority, and because they're closely linked with projecting water needs, They were brought on as collaborating agencies, and they're working out the funding between GWISA and Grand County and San Juan County and the Special Services District on how they want to participate funding themselves, because of the city, we didn't have to do that. So the MOU was just, the coalition was the 3 largest water providers in the valley, with the other collaborating agencies on board for the working group. The MOU has been signed by all members of the coalition. The city signed it first, and then GWISA, and then San Juan County, just the way it went. It was signed January 25th, excuse me. The plan consultant will begin working within the next 6 weeks. The plan scope of work, and includes public and stakeholder engagement. We've had that discussions before with council, that it's important that the public be engaged, and we knew that, and the stakeholder and the coalition completely supports that. And how this could work is the consultant will be managed by a staff level project management team from the coalition, meaning those 3 water providers, as well as Grand and San Juan County. And a plan focus group composed of 1 elected official from each of the coalition entities. So Moab, GWISA, San Juan Special Services District, Grand and San Juan counties will meet monthly or every 6 weeks as they desire by Zoom meeting with the project management team. And the reason we recommended by Zoom is because of the geographic area, as well as its way that the public can participate. We get comments both ways about Zoom from the public. Some people like it because it's easier. Some people who don't like it because they don't have a computer. So hopefully that'll get worked out. But this can be a public meeting if so desired. So that's the way that the staff will update the elected officials on the plan progress and how elected officials can have input into it by directing staff. And if someone says, oh, this is a good time to go make a presentation to the elected bodies, that'd be a good time to do that. They'll also know about the stakeholder and public engagement plans. The plan should be completed in late 2022 or early 23. Plan implementation can begin in 2023. Well 12 facilities should be completed, come online this summer, 2022. The Mill Creek project will be completed this spring, early summer. Applications for the grant loan money for the new water storage tank will be done in 2022. It's high on the list. And plans for the tank should be completed and permits obtained in 2022 or 2023. And the tank construction should be completed within 2023. As well as, I talked about the bond projects that were in the rate study, but there are other projects too. We just designed those bond projects. They were the largest projects and they were the highest priority projects. We wanted to get those underway as quickly as possible. But if you'll recall, members from the last council, there are other projects over the next 7 or 8 years that are smaller projects that we'll be tackling as well. So that'll be into the future as well. We've set the stage to continue to make those system improvements with a water rate increase. Now I'd like to shift gears a little bit and talk about a comparison of local water groups. Because I know there's been some questions and perhaps confusion, but this is my understanding of it, and I think it's pretty close to accurate. There are several water groups in the Moab Spanish Valley area. The Moab Area Watershed Partnership was formed in 2011, primarily organized by Utah DEQ to facilitate EPA 319 program funding, which is water quality funding for local projects, including Castle Valley and the Moab Spanish Valley. Oops, sorry about the flying. The Canyonlands Watershed Council was formed in 2009, and this is a 501(c) private group that works to bring, and this is a direct quote, Southeastern Utah's landscapes and communities towards health, self-sufficiency, diversity, and resilience. So they work throughout southeastern Utah. The Moab Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board was formed in 2017. It was organized by the city of Moab to advise city council on water quality and conservation policies in city limits. And at this point, over the last 6 months, probably, maybe longer, 9 months, the board and staff have had discussions about whether or not their mission is accomplished after adoption of the 2021 conservation plan that the council recently adopted just a couple months ago, or whether they want to take a turn and change their mission. But that's a discussion that's been ongoing. Then there's the Spanish Valley Regional Water Management Coordination Group, which was formed in 2021 that I referred to earlier, organized by staff of the 3 largest utility providers, meeting monthly to discuss and collaborate on mutually relevant issues such as interconnects between the systems, maintenance on the systems, data sharing, anything else, because we know that maintaining every system needs to be up and running. And if there's ways that we can help each other in times of need, we want to do that. So this work coordination group does much more than work to manage the regional management plan. And then there's the coalition, which is the Water Utility Resource Management Plan Coalition, which was formed in 2022 by the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding of the 3 agencies. The goal of the coalition is to ensure resilient management of water resources for the residents and visitors to the valley for the next 100 years. And that coalition at this time is specifically formed by the MOU to complete the management plan. At the end of the management plan, I think the question will be asked, does that coalition need to stay together for something else? I don't know the answer to that because the plan isn't done. Excuse me. Just wanted to look kind of at a graphic. Sometimes a picture helps explain the text. This is a picture of the MOPS, Moab Area Watershed Partnership boundaries. They work in the Moab Spanish Valley, but they also go over into, excuse me, Castle Valley. The Conservation Drought Management Advisory Board was focused on issues within the city limits of Moab. This represents the city limits of Moab. And then this is the watershed area for the resource management plan. You can see it spans Grand County, San Juan County, and goes all the way to the river, as well as encompasses Moab. Excuse me. With that, I'd be happy to try and answer any questions while I take a cough drop.
Any questions for Chuck? Thank you, Chuck. That was very, very thorough. Council, any questions? Chuck, if you wouldn't mind unsharing your screen so I could see.
Yep,
Thank
sorry.
you. That's okay. Caleb?
So I'm curious about the discussion of interconnects. It seems like in the past, maybe that has seemed less feasible. So I'm, you've heard this before, but I'm wondering if it could preclude the need for, or delay the need for the water tank if like GWISA can help provide for peak flows or for firefighting.
Yeah, so the direct answer is we don't think so. The interconnects at this point in time are going to, and we haven't started design, but we just started having the discussions in the working group. They're primarily for times of emergency, which I know you said the peak times might be one of those such emergencies. But our fire flows are low on average too. So that's the thing that the water storage tank will do, is bring up the level of fire flow availability during the average time as well as the peak time.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
And then a question, this might be for Chuck or for Nathan. We haven't talked about it in a while, but a few years ago, we were talking about some distant possibility of perhaps having better or more consistent in-stream flows in Mill Creek through town. And I'm wondering if there's the possibility for that has evolved at all, positive or negative?
I can speak to that, Chuck. So yeah, it has been positive. The legislature just passed legislation last week, HB 33, which I worked on, to allow for any entity to hold an in-stream flow. So you now have the right as a city, once that bill is signed by the governor and goes into effect later this year, likely in May, to do an in-stream flow, assuming you have water rights that you can use to do that, or that you could lease from someone else. You've historically had, since 2020, the ability to do a water bank, which would allow you to do the same thing. I helped draft that bill as well. So you now have at least two options. I think that the limiting factor will just be finding water rights that you can use to put in Mill Creek. I do think you have some water rights of your own, but I think you're likely looking at some surface water rights would probably be the easiest thing to do that are currently diverted and used for irrigation. If we could find somebody who's willing to allow us to use those for an in-stream flow, then these new laws would allow you to do that.
Yeah, to build upon that, at the working group, we've discussed that as part of the resource management plan. We were going to discuss the increase in creek flows as one of the opportunities that we anticipate the public is interested in. And there might be a way, working cooperatively, that we can do what Nathan suggested there. So we'll be evaluating it from a feasibility and water rights side, because we've engaged Nathan's firm to help us on that plan.
Great, that's good news. Thanks.
Yep. Great. Anybody else? Questions for Chuck or Nathan? Ronnie?
So Chuck, I'm still a little bit confused. I saw in the packet later in Mila stuff, there was some references, but our water conservation plan update references the Moab Spanish Valley Water Providers Coalition, and then the names used since are different. So even today, I just wanted to check, is the Spanish Valley Regional Water Management Coordination Group on your slide from 2021, is that supposed to then be the same as the referenced Moab Spanish Valley Water Providers Coalition in our water update? And should I think of that as the same thing as the Water Resources Management Plan Coalition that you just mentioned?
Let me try answering that, Ronnie. The coordination group is the staff level group that was formed in 2021 and continues to meet to address all the issues we talked about. And one of the things that they did was they realized that a long range plan was a good idea. We reached agreement on that. But staff doesn't have the ability to sign those MOUs. So we decided, well, the right way to do that is to do an MOU between the elected officials of those bodies. And that MOU created the term coalition of those three entities. So they're the staff level part of those three entities. And that's why I pointed out in tonight's slide, and maybe it wasn't clear last time we talked, that there will be elected official involvement as the coalition. It's not just staff level. And on Mila's, I don't remember exactly what the quote is. I might have to defer to Mila on that one.
Yeah, multiple times it's the Moab Spanish Valley Water Providers Coalition as the group that started meeting last summer. And that same coalition that created is identified in our agenda summaries as the one that created the MOU. So that's why it gets really confusing. So I didn't know if the names are changing or swapping. Are we going to update the conservation plan update? Because right now the name of the group created in summer of 2021 does not appear to be correct.
That may be a Mila question.
Yeah, I think it was just simply a typo because we hadn't formalized what we were necessarily calling this MOU effort. I don't know even when we made the decision. Like the county calls it consortium. There's just like a messaging inconsistency. That's all, I think. Mila?
Yeah, I mean, when we formed the plan, the intention was to eventually create this coalition, which is what that refers to. And it didn't contemplate the working group being started first. So the process just turned out differently than we had anticipated when we made the plan. I put an explanation in my agenda summary that should cover it as well.
Yeah,
And it's in the
as a council
presentation
member,
too.
it's really confusing because I go back and I reference that document and it references the coalition being formed last summer. And now we're all saying the coalition hasn't been formed. So at some point we kind of need to clean it up because it becomes very confusing when you share documents with people or you look back historically to know what you're talking about. So can we either put an update on the update that has the correct language, or make sure the names of groups that we're going through tonight is appended, because our agenda summary, even for this workshop, references a working group. I don't know amid all these groups, which one is the working group.
I'm not sure about the working group, but because I'm not involved in that effort at all, so I only have knowledge of the language that's in the plan, and I'm happy to bring an amended plan to the council. I think you need to adopt the amendment if you wanted to do it that way. We could have an amended plan at a meeting for adoption.
Okay. I think it does need to be fixed because anybody I pass it on to now is going to think the coalition started meeting in the summer last year. And now we're saying the coalition wasn't even formed. So,
Right. And I think, yeah, Ronnie, I think that if you get questions from the public, you can just clarify that the coalition is going to be established through the MOU that you just approved on the, a meeting or so ago.
yeah,
And that
it needs to be fixed because I can't even keep it straight. I mean, it seems like I've got a list of 6 names now that are crossing and used in a cross-referencing at different historical times. And I just like to see it cleaned up so that I know what I'm supposed to be referring to. And so people who reference the document know what we're talking about.
Okay. Well, I think if that's something that can be done, Mila and Chuck, you guys can work together to make sure that it's clear. And I think the focus at this point should be on where we are moving forward with the resource and the conservation plans.
Yeah, I mean, just keep in mind that the scope of work we're looking at even references the coalition in a past context and not a yet to be created context. So that's why it's confusing too.
Okay.
And I'm just trying to be accurate by reading the stuff we approve and thinking that that's what I'm supposed to go with. So when it changes, I kind of need to know, because then I go to other meetings and people don't know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
I tried to clarify that in a PowerPoint, and now Mila and I work together and try and fix the other documents so you can do that. So they'll be consistent.
Is this the place we're supposed to ask questions about the MOU? Or are we supposed to wait with those for another time? I mean, not the MOU, the scope of work.
Well, we have limited time today, but I think we probably want to just direct questions based on the presentation that Chuck just gave us and not specifically to the MOU and the scope of work. Unless Chuck, I mean, it feels like those questions may be pretty detailed and it may take a little bit more time than we have today. And, just so everybody knows, this is just the beginning of the conversation regarding both of these plans. And so there'll be future meetings coming down the pike where we can get into some of those specifics. But for today, I think if we could just keep our questions focused on the presentation that Chuck just gave about the past and the present and, what we're doing moving forward.
So I guess just one general one for everyone moving forward is the scope of work, is it kind of set or is it kind of in a draft phase where we perceive it may be changing?
What I put in the packet was the scope of work as a draft. I believe that it's been reviewed by the coalition and the staff. I think it's pretty close, but there's room to tweak it there. I went in and tweaked some of the language for the stakeholder involvement after our last meeting to make it a little more clear. So I think it's a final draft almost, but there's room to to tweak that scope of work. Yeah.
Okay, well, my one main question for colleagues moving forward, since y'all voted for it and I voted against it, and it got cut off asking questions last time, was you guys approved a scope of work which calls for additional funding if we want to have a public open house and presentation of the final plan. So I would kind of like to know, I'm guessing the public would like to know, what's the plan to pay for that? Or are you thinking you're just going to skip the open house and presentation? It's item 411 under public engagement, item F.
Yeah,
Carly,
that's,
is that something that we could talk about during our strategic planning process? Or, I mean, for budgetary purposes?
we already know we're going to do the final report,
Oh, okay,
the final meeting.
okay,
Yeah, we have had discussion with the consultant that we're going to shift some of the resources to have that. We know that's a good point. Yeah, no, we have to have a final meeting.
yeah, we do.
Yeah, we would not do it without that. Yeah, I brought that point up too. Again, that's why it was draft. We wanted to give you the best draft. But everything else I think is pretty close.
Okay, very good. That's great. Ronnie, what else?
Oh, well, that's okay. You guys wanted to limit it to what's here tonight, so I'll stop.
Okay, anybody else? All right, we're moving right along to Mila and the water concert. Wait, somebody else? Kaylin, yes.
I have one more. I was just holding back in case any of the other council members want to go, but just one more question, if I may.
Sure.
So I'm under the impression that I heard you say that we probably have additional water resources that we can continue to develop, but it seems like there are a range of we know that we're going to run up against our water resource limits sometime, hopefully not immediately, but at some point. And so my impression is that part of the purpose of the regional coordination is to plan for that, even if regardless of when it happens, so that to reduce conflict. And so just to clarify, that is still part of the scope of work, is sort of figuring out the relationships and kind of, we're planning for future development, but we're also planning for constraints.
Yes, I think the answer is, yeah, if I understand your question, the answer is yes.
Okay, great.
And I can even elaborate on that, Kaylin. We're part of the work that we're doing once we get the scope of work approved is procuring a facilitator to be part of that team. Someone who is an expert in these water resource, I wouldn't call them conflicts, but just where there are different ideas about using shared environmental resources. And we have two firms who are interested in helping us develop what we're calling like the consensus yield or the community yield. And we use that as the basis for our future alternative, and then from there develop policies. The council develops policies and ordinances and practices to ensure that we are meeting that community yield, because we're all realizing we are bumping up against a limit, but we might have kind of different ideas of what that limit looks like, and it's important that as a whole valley we come to some sort of consensus on that.
Thank you.
Ronnie?
I was going to back Kaylin up on that. I do think it's important every time we discuss safe yield to mention that there is disagreement, and even our water conservation plan update states that water providers in the valley disagree. I just think until we all reach some more mutual thing that for the public, that it's important that it be stated every time. Some people think we've reached yield, some people think we aren't there, and we have so much. So I just think it's important. That's always part of the conversation.
All right. Any other questions or comments from council for Chuck or Nathan? So in terms of the scope of work, Chuck, how do we get to that final draft? Or does that need to come before the council, or do you want council members to review it? Or are you going to send it out to us and then we can make our comments?
I would suggest that if council members have questions or comments or things they'd like to see in there, if they could send it to me in the next week or so, we can then prepare a response or hopefully include it in that scope, and then we can get that finalized, run by the coalition members, because this, they're in it too with us, right? GWISA and Spanish Valley Special Services District. They've approved the scope as was written. So we'll have the opportunity to finalize that in the next couple of weeks. So I'd encourage council, if you have comments, to send them to me, or if you have questions, want to discuss it, feel free to call me and we can talk through it.
Ronnie?
So everybody has the right information too. At our January meeting, we discussed the possibility of the Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board looking it over. So I know it's on their agenda, I think for March 9th. So just so you guys have that timing in mind.
All right, thanks, Chuck. Appreciate it. Comments to Chuck about the scope of work, and I'm going to turn the time over now to Mila.
Thanks, Mayor. So I am also going to share my screen for a presentation. Okay. I see loading. Cool. Does everybody else see that? Okay, great. So I have prepared a presentation to give us our first kind of update on the water conservation plan and where we're at and where we're going. I did start with a little bit of a summary for those that weren't part of the effort last year at the end of the year. So I apologize if some of that is a little bit repetitive. So the water conservation plans, for those that weren't part of this effort in the fall, they were established by the Water Conservation Plan Act in 1998, amended in 2004. Every Utah water retailer and conservancy district must adopt a water conservation plan every 5 years, and they're all filed with the Utah Division of Water Resources. So GWISA does also have one as well that you can find on their website. Non-compliance means we don't get state funds or loans, so it's definitely worth it. I think also it was a really great exercise for the public and the council to go through to talk about our own goals, regardless of the state requirements. So we ended up adopting our water conservation plan in December of 2021, and you can find it online at the address below. That's the short version. You can also go to the sustainability page, and then there's a water conservation button there. They're not readily available on the state website, but I'm sure that you can probably find those plans if you ask for them. The main concept behind the plans are these regional conservation goals. They're just how the state is directing the conservation effort. They're not necessarily, I don't think for us, the be all and end all of what we want to achieve. However, the conservation plan in the fall that was adopted stated that Moab's goal by 2030 is going to be 250 gallons per capita per day. It was adopted with the previous council included a state support clause. So we have additional goals of 5 gallons per capita per day saved if the state contributes some support. And that's both in the policy arena and funding. So the idea there was that Moab is already doing better than we need to. And as long as the state is going to support our efforts, then we will continue to do even better. Kaylin, did you want to say something?
Just a question. On the previous slide, you stated that we weren't a provider was not eligible for state funding if they didn't meet the goal. And
no, if they don't have a plan.
Oh, if they don't have a plan. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry. Yes, you can. The goals we need to try to achieve. We just have to have a plan for them to qualify us. Sorry about that. Yeah, so with state support, we have a goal of 230 gallons per capita per day by 2030. And that lovely matching number actually represents a 50% reduction in outdoor water use. So we just got lucky with that math. So the water conservation plan is composed of these sections. feel free to take a look. It's housed online. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what's in there. A lot of the beginning sections 1 through 5 are details about our water system and our water supply, and then some of the history and where our water goes. So a lot of that is really good data. There are some really useful figures in there. It's got a lot of information, most of which is also publicly available in other forums. So this sort of just collates it together. And then section 6, water conservation, is what I'll be covering today. That was what the council and the public outreach efforts really engaged about. This is where we had choice for the most part. So our water use reduction goal, we've already talked about. The water conservation metric the state uses is that GPCD. So we're going to go over the current conservation measures, current ordinances and standards, the new measures proposed, and then the timeline. So this is the timeline here that's in section 6. It's right at the end at 6.8. It's certainly not something that we're held to, but I think it's a reasonable guide to be working with. So the general approaches, before we go into those details, the general approaches that we're talking about in the plan are many-pronged: policies, infrastructure improvements, investment in technologies and incentive programs, outreach and education, coordinated resource management, and then research and data. So the plan suggests that we have a pretty robust approach. So the things that we have already done before the passing of this plan were we have a leak protection program, which involves a rebate for customers that fix their leaks. Then if you fix your leak, you can get back the money that you lost paying for the leaked water. I'm sure everybody's aware of the new water reclamation facility, the WRF. It's exemplary in its water conservation, and a pretty cool place to visit if you haven't had the chance already. Then we did do some outreach and education. This was a lawn watering guide that was sent out. And then there has, of course, been some articles and ads about the drought and about watering and things like that that residents can do. So these are the things that have already happened. In the present, this is what we're going to talk about next. And I did just want to reiterate that MOU Spanish Valley Water Providers Coalition, which has now been formed, was misnamed in this plan. So we can certainly update that in an amendment if that's desired. But the explanation over here to the right just explains the movement of those two groups. So 2021, we had the goal to establish the coalition. As we said, that was turned into the coordination group. It was intended to be the coordination group. And then we were intending to work with USU to develop efficient watering schedule for city parks and adopt the water conservation plan update. So that pretty much happened in the way that it was intended to, not with that name. We are currently working with USU. We've been in touch with them for a number of months. The woman who is going to help us do this from a technical standpoint, Kelly Kopp, is extremely busy, and we are continuing to work with her. It's just taking a little longer than we had anticipated. And then we adopted the water conservation plan update. So our 2021 goals have pretty much been met. In the present, we're looking at this 2022 box, and there were a number of things we've talked about doing in 2022. If we go through them, we are going to hear from the group that is doing the technical research and recommendations on the landscape ordinance standards that we could potentially adopt. They'll go into a lot more detail about that. The gray water ordinance we have talked about, and it looks like it's a little bit more complicated than we might have initially supposed. So that's going to take a little bit more research before we continue to pursue that. This one as well, the development standards, including water-wise elements. So this has some legal aspects, and we're looking forward to working with the planning department and with our legal advisors to make sure that we can do that in a way that makes sense according to Utah code. Other than that, as Chuck said, the Water Resource Management Plan is, I'm sorry about the acronym, it was just very long, is anticipated to be adopted within a year, or at least fleshed out within a year. So that's well underway with the consultant. We have reached out about the newly adopted Water Conservation Plan, and we hope to do a little bit more outreach on that. This smart timers, there's funding from the state that's available. So we're hoping to be able to get those hopefully by the summer watering season. And the grass removal areas we're hoping to look at with USU. So we need to get Kelly Kopp down here for a visit. But the smart timers should be something we'll be able to take advantage of pretty soon. And those will include hopefully moisture meters. And so we'll be able to make sure that we are never overwatering our park grass. And that's the biggest water user for the city facilities. So that should make a big difference for our city water use. And then a water-wise landscaping guide. This is something that we're hoping we will be able to use some of the landscaping ordinance recommendations for. We're going to have a plant list and then some of the resources that USU is sharing with us on watering, and then also ways to xeriscape and water-wise landscape effectively. So that's something that we're going to hopefully have out by the end of the year after we go through the process with the landscape recommendations. So that's what they'll talk about next. The other activities that weren't in the plan that we are doing are, I was invited to participate in the Utah Water Conservation Forum as a board member. You can see their mission below. It's a number of people that work in water conservation around the state. We're one of the only rural communities that's part of it. It's mostly northern Utah. So it's been a really great way to hear about funding opportunities and, all the bigger stuff that they're doing upstate that, they recognize hasn't necessarily been extended down to our, more smaller communities down in the South. And there's an interest in involving us more in those kinds of opportunities. So hopefully that will result in some boons for the city. Our pilot green infrastructure project that was originally on the timeline for 2023, I think it was, but there's been a lot of inspiration and momentum, and there's some community members that would really like to make it happen this year. So we have coordinated with Public Works and the Parks Department, and we found this spot here on 400 North and 500 West that will be looking into turning into a water-wise and also beautiful location, or instead of the patch of goat heads that it currently is. Those are growing quite well though. And then USU has just initiated an independent review of the studies that Chuck was mentioning earlier. This project is in its infancy. It's independent. They're doing it, not at the behest of anybody, just out of their own interest. But they have a geohydrologist that's going to be collecting information from all of the previous studies and the data available from DWR, and they're going to give us their opinion. So that's the other things that are happening. And then for the future, I'm sorry, those lines are not attached. They're attached to the box. We're looking at 2023 plus. So this is the 2023 through 2026 when we'll be updating our water conservation plan. The main things to see, so the 2024 through 2026 obviously get a little bit slimmer since it's hard to know what exactly we are projecting to be doing out there. I imagine some of the things in 2023, like these programs, are going to be extended out that way. But it's a lot of outreach. We were anticipating the beginning of meeting this 2030 goal as being as incentive-based as possible, not pursuing any kinds of, penalties or anything like that, but really focusing on just encouragement and outreach and education. So on that note, what the things that we'll be looking at probably for the next budget season as well are the potential conservation programs we had adopted in the plan. These range from assistance with fixture replacement, potentially assistance with inventories, certainly outreach, potentially offering funding for partial funding for smart timers for homeowners. Then, of course, there's the popular, turf grass buyback or flip your strip type of programs, assistance for water-wise landscape conversion. And that can look like a lot of things. So I think we're going to do some research as to what the most effective methods would be there. And then including green infrastructure and whether that's, just chunks of city property like the spot there on 400 North and 500 West, or whether it's helping folks install that on the strips that they own in city right of way, or, that could look also like a lot of things. So stay tuned for more on that note. And I will leave you with this quote. It's long, and I'll send it around if necessary. But essentially, the last sentence is the important part.
All right. Thank you, Mila. Questions? All right. No, looks like there aren't any questions. The only comment that I would like to make is education is going to be the biggest thing that needs to take place in 2022. I think people need to really hear what we have to say. And I think it's going to be kind of a challenge because a lot of people feel like that we are being told how to conserve water, yet we're allowing hotels to fill up their swimming pools. I've heard that a lot. So I think education is going to be really, really important. All right.
And can I just preface the next presentation just really
Yes.
quickly, because I'm not sure if those folks are going to address it, but we are, Victoria and John are here from, John is from Western Resource Advocates and Victoria from Water Now. We got funding for this project from the Water Now Alliance. The recommendations that they are about to detail are only intended to apply to new development as requirements. So none of these are intended to apply to any current residences. But what they will do is inform some landscape guides that we'll be able to use for education for current homeowners. So these would potentially be requirements for new development and just education and resource for current developments.
Kayla, did you have a comment, question?
Yeah, so sometimes remodeling triggers new development standards depending on what they are. So when you say new development, do you know where the line is for that yet, or is that something that will be worked out?
No, and so I think that's a great thing to keep in mind and give us your suggestions. So this is the first time that these have been received and discussed by any of the public bodies, and they'll go to Planning Commission next for discussion, and then the Water Board will discuss them in their meeting in March. And so this is the first round of feedback. So if there's anything like that you would have opinions on or whatever it is, that would be very helpful.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Are we ready for John and Victoria?
I think we're ready if you all are.
We're ready.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Are you seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And thank you to the council for having us here today. So like Mila just went over, we have been working with the city for since last year to help develop a set of recommendations for the updating the landscape ordinance. We'll get into a bit more about what that actually looks like. Just quickly, what we want to cover today with you all, we'll introduce ourselves, give you a little background on the project and what we've been doing and how we've been conducting it. Then we'll actually go through the recommended landscape ordinance updates, and then we'll definitely have some time for questions and discussion at the end. So just briefly, so as was mentioned, I work for Western Resource Advocates. My colleague Lindsay Rogers, who should be joining us here shortly to help with the presentation. Western Resource Advocates, it's a conservation nonprofit, been around for about 30 years. We work on a variety of land, energy, and water issues. Lindsay and I are both on our water team. Lindsay and I do a lot of urban and water conservation and a lot of land use planning work, mostly in Utah and Colorado. So like we had mentioned, our other colleague, Victoria Arling, is also helping with the project. So I'm going to turn over to her to introduce her organization and then talk about the project background just a little bit. So Victoria.
Great, thanks, John. And hi, everyone. As John mentioned, my name is Victoria Arling. I'm the Colorado Basin Program Manager for Water Now. And again, Water Now is a national nonprofit. We're a network of local water leaders, working to advance sustainable, affordable, equitable, and climate resilient solutions across different communities. And next slide, please, John. And so as part of our work, we've launched this initiative called Project Accelerator. It's essentially our program to help cities, water agencies, and other organizations to jumpstart their sustainable water projects. And so through Project Accelerator, we are able to provide 250 hours of pro bono program and technical assistance over about a 6 to 9 month period. And this past summer, so about 6-7 months ago now, the city of Moab applied and was selected to receive support from both Water Now and our partners at Western Resource Advocates to help develop these updated water-wise landscaping ordinances. So thanks, John.
All right, thanks, Victoria. So just to take a kind of a step back and give some context for the Project Accelerator project that Victoria just mentioned, and this kind of concept of a specific type of water conservation that we're focused on. So within the broader bucket of water conservation that Mila was going over a lot in that water conservation plan, there's this specific component about integrating water in land use planning. As Mila mentioned, the recommendations we have for tonight are for new development. So this idea you connect water efficiency to your development process. And so this is a relatively new concept kind of in the water world in the last 5-10 years, but it's gained a lot of traction. And most notably, I like to show this slide. This is from Governor Cox's drought announcement last July, where he had mentioned the state was going to focus on 4 specific water conservation tools, one of which is this exact topic, this idea of integrating water and land use planning. Historically, water and land use planning have been separate, and so you get planning happening in one way and you get water planning happening another way. There's very little interaction, and by bringing those 2 processes together, you can actually allow for much more efficient water development. And I'll just note that in addition to Governor Cox making this announcement, there's a bill going through the Utah legislature right now that would require including water conservation in a city's and county's general plan. So that's just one way to integrate water and land use planning is you look at your general plan, you're going to do an update, you add water efficiency into that plan. So there's a piece of legislation moving through that would also require this. So I think it's just kind of an important big picture context for this work. So as Mila just went over, this comes out of the water conservation plan update that was just passed in 2021. As she noted, there was a focus on landscaping and irrigation efficiency standards, which is the basis for our recommendations today that come out of that conservation plan update. Okay, so now we're going to get into those actual recommendations. You'll see we have the 11 listed out here, and we're going to go through each one briefly. But a couple of things to note before Victoria and Lindsay go through them. So we developed this list of 11 recommendations through a significant amount of research on what other Western communities typically do. Lindsay and Victoria and I have a lot of experience with working with communities, looking at their landscape regulations. So we did a lot of research on what other communities have done, including ones similar in climate, in socioeconomics to Moab. So trying to learn from our neighbors as best we can. A lot of conversations with city staff, with Mila specifically. We've gone back and forth with Mila on a lot of these options. We presented to the water board last December. And then we've done a decent amount of stakeholder outreach to local experts within the Moab community, landscaping firms, nurseries, trying to really understand which recommendations would be most appropriate for Moab. Importantly, this set of 11 recommendations, we're not saying we're recommending Moab adopt all 11 of these. These are more, think more about these like a menu of options, and the city can select which ones they think are most appropriate. Some do impact whether you would select others. So at number 7, the landscape water budget that we'll go over, if you select a water budget approach, you might not select some of the other recommendations. So just keep that in mind as we go through. This is not a laundry list, it's rather more like a menu. And depending on which ones you would want to choose kind of impacts which other ones are appropriate. And then the other thing I'll just add really quickly is based on a lot of those conversations we've had, these were developed with an eye towards kind of economic and logistic feasibility for both homeowners, developers, the landscape community, landscape professional community. We didn't want to recommend anything that's not realistic or that would put an undue burden on homeowners within Moab. So just kind of keep that in mind. You'll see we have some recommendations, some requirements, some incentives, that sort of thing. So just wanted to set that context for these 11 options that we're going to go over. So we had a longer list beforehand. Some of those we kind of moved to more of going towards an education and outreach option. So things around soil amendments, gray water reuse, and then rainwater capture. We, based on those conversations, thought those might be more appropriate, not in the code per se, but more as a education and outreach opportunity. So we won't go over those in great detail tonight, but happy to answer questions about what that might look like. So just to give you all to get you primed on before we go into the 11 recommendations, here are some of the things that we'd love to hear from you all tonight that would help us kind of fine tune and refine those recommendations. Any questions or discussions you have, any options that you think would make sense to prioritize, and conversely, any options that we present tonight that you think would not make sense for Moab, and any other thoughts. So we're hoping to hold off on questions until we get through the 11 recommendations so we can make sure we get through them all, but just wanted to let you know what would be super helpful for us. And of course, anything else that you want to discuss, we are happy to tonight. So with that context and background, I will turn it over to Victoria to start going through some of those, going through the 11 recommendations. So Victoria?
Great, thanks for that overview, John. And I'll just reiterate one more time, again, these options are, intended for new developments or redevelopments, depending on how that is defined. So just keep that in mind as we're going through all of these. And so as John mentioned, Lindsay and I will be running through these 11 landscaping standard options that we've compiled. And again, it's intended to really be a menu of options. We're not recommending that the city necessarily adopt all of them, but whatever ones would really be most appropriate for Moab. And so I'll start with living plant material. Our recommendation is, to require a 25% living plant material at maturity in the landscaped area for all development types, and then require a 50% living plant material in these high visibility commercial development areas. While requiring living plants does not necessarily help reduce that landscape water demand, a living plant material minimum can be really important, for landscaping aesthetics, the reduced heat island effect, pollinator habitat, and among other benefits. And so throughout our research and also stakeholder engagement, our stakeholders really expressed support for having a living plant material requirement and indicated that these percentages could resonate pretty well within the city. And so for the next one, the non-living permeable ground cover, we recommend the code update is to allow up to 75% of the landscaped area to be that non-living permeable materials, such as organic mulches, gravel, decorative pavements, etc. And then again, for those high visibility commercial areas, allow up to 50% of the landscaped areas to be that non-living permeable ground cover. And so it's really important to strike that balance between the non-living ground cover and that living plant material. So allowing, for a greater percentage of that non-living ground cover could have an effect on reducing that landscape water demand, which is really, something we've heard that the city's been looking to do. And so what you'll see is that these maximum non-living ground cover percentages do complement that minimum living plant material percentages from number 1. For both that residential and commercial developments, such that they add up to 100% of that total landscapable area. Our stakeholders were generally supportive of these concepts and said, ensuring that these percentages add up to 100% was really necessary for clarity if it was going to be implemented into those code updates. And then the next one on turf limits, as I'm sure you're all very aware, but high water use, non-essential turf limitations are really potentially one of the most important standards that we can implement to reduce that landscape water demand. Given Moab's desert climate and that irrigation demands for that cool season turf, so that Kentucky bluegrass, are really significant. So any reductions in the amount of new turf being installed in Moab will have really large water savings. Currently in Moab, there are no limits on turf for residential development. And what we've heard from our stakeholders is that there is some form of turf limits. We're really strongly supported. And so what we're recommending is for all residential development, require that turf areas shall be limited to areas that have suitable shade, not be allowed in spaces that are narrower than 10 feet wide, not be used in more than 10% of that total landscaped area, or a maximum of 200 square feet of turf, whatever is greater. Not be allowed on slopes greater than 33, that should be degrees. Sorry, I think that says percent there. And then lastly, HOAs may not mandate the installation of turf on residential properties. So that's for our residential developments. For our commercial properties, we want to retain the current standards, which is actually A through D, that's already above. And I'll just note that, this turf limits requirement may not be applicable if we want this water budget approach, which is that option 7 that's in the packet that was provided. And yeah, Lindsay will explain that in a little bit, but yeah, so if that is adopted, this option may not apply. Next slide, please. And so as you know, there's an increasingly critical need to conserve water in the arid West, provide habitat for local animals within the urban environment, and create a more sustainable landscape system through the use of adapted plant materials. And so a plant list can be used to address a lot of these environmental concerns by encouraging or requiring certain low water and native plant species, and to categorize plant species by their water use. And so our recommendation for this option is for all development types, that all plant materials must be selected from the city's approved plant list, which will be organized by a non-irrigated and very low category, low, medium, and a high water use category. Many of the stakeholders we talked to expressed general interest and support of the City of Moab developing and maintaining a comprehensive plant list, as that would include lots of plants that are appropriate to Moab's unique climate and would really give landscapers the flexibility to select a variety of plants based on what's available in that list. This plant list would again be developed from a lot of reputable existing sources and then reviewed and approved by the local plant experts in the city. And then one last option I want to review before I turn it over to Lindsay is this water-wise plant requirement option. Water-wise and some native plants has significantly lower water demand than turf grass and other high water use plants. And there are also many associated benefits to using water-wise and native plants, such as providing pollinator habitat, being fire resistant, lower maintenance, and providing just functional, attractive landscapes. And so in this option, we recommend that for all development types, a minimum of 50% of that living plant material must be selected from that non-irrigated, very low, or that low category that's in that city's approved plant list, which is, again, to be developed if that's the route we want to go. Generally, our stakeholders agree that the landscaping code updates should include requirements for water-wise plants. And again, if the city wanted to go to this water budget approach, which Lindsay will get into on the next slide, this option number 5 would probably not be applicable as it's built into that water budget analysis already. And so with that, thank you very much for hanging in there, and I'll turn it over to Lindsay.
Great, thanks, Victoria. It's nice to meet you all. I'm Lindsay Rogers. I'm a water policy analyst with WRA, and I'm very happy to be here with you tonight. So I'm going to start with number 6, hydrozones. Hydrozones means grouping our plants in the landscape according to their water usage. So we could say low, very low, medium, high water use. There's sort of some different ways to define this, and sort of see in the image on the left here an example of what this looks like in practice. So you've got some lawn in the back. Maybe it looks like it's a native lawn, so maybe that's a medium water use. It's got some perimeter planting, shrubs that look like they might be low water use. So it's the practice of ensuring that all of your plants of the same water use are irrigated effectively on the same valve. This practice was supported across the board by all of our stakeholders, and actually Wild Landscapes LLC and MOAB categorizes and groups plants together for sale by their hydrozone already, which is great to see. We also think this standard would tie in really well if the city were to adopt a plant list, which would list those plants by their hydrozone water use category. The next recommendation I want to talk about here is the landscape water budget. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time here because I think it's maybe one of the more complex options to consider. But the intention of a landscape water budget is to require landscapes to be designed at the outset in a way that places a cap on the total amount of water that the landscape can use during an irrigation season. And our stakeholders really liked this approach because it's the way to reduce landscape water demand while allowing for flexibility of what you actually install in your landscape. So the water budget that we've arrived at this point is 15 gallons per square foot per season. And we came to this number by determining MOAB's evapotranspiration and effective precipitation, and then plugging in various scenarios to EPA WaterSense's water budget calculator. Though I do want to note that, and we've had some comments on the evapotranspiration in particular and what percentage of effective precipitation we're using. So we're really still ground truthing those numbers, and we want to get as much input as we can to make sure that those are the most appropriate, the most accurate numbers that we have. So, if we end up adjusting the numbers, we would then potentially adjust that water budget allowance. I also want to note that edible crops would be excluded from that calculation in a water budget approach. And I apologize that wasn't included in your memo, but we've heard that repeatedly from both MILA and our stakeholders that that's going to be really important as a community value. So you can see in the methodology in attachment A of this memo, but the basic point is to arrive at a middle ground number that wouldn't allow a property owner to install all high water use Kentucky bluegrass, but it also wouldn't require that the property owner uses all very low or even low water use plants. They would want to have, some combination of the two to land within that range. The other important element of the water budget is the special features. So these are things like green stormwater infrastructure and gray water systems and native vegetation areas, which the water budget incentivizes by increasing a given property's maximum allowance up to 3 gallons if you use one or more of these features in increasing percentages of your total irrigated area. So while we weren't really able to land at this point, say on a regulation to require gray water systems. We did see this as an opportunity to incentivize, and we knew that was something the city was interested. And of course, many of these special features have benefits that go beyond just water conservation. So just as an example for the special features, if I were to install a gray water system with mulch basins and plants that covered 10% of my irrigated area, then I could increase my water budget allowance to 17 gallons per season, meaning I might have the opportunity to install a little more turf grass in the backyard for my kids or my dogs, or even a water feature like a small fountain or a hot tub, which is also calculated into the water budget allowance. So I'll have John go to the next slide to show an example. So big, thanks.
I hate to interrupt you, but I just wanted you to know that we have about 10 minutes left. So I'm sure council has some questions for you, but just to give you a little time frame.
Okay, thank you so much. I thought we had until 5:30, but Mila, I'm going to ask you what you'd like us to do at this point. Do you want us to pause there?
No, you have 10 more minutes.
You have until 5:30.
Oh, to present? No.
Yes.
Or for questions too?
No, just to present.
I got it. Okay, sorry. Thank you for the clarification. Thank you, Mayor. So very quickly, so Jeff Adams, all thanks to him and Mila for pulling this together. He went out to City Hall today and he came up with this schematic, this hydrozone map of how this would plug into to Moab City Hall. And if you see here, we've calculated the irrigated water need for the 6 different hydrozones. So approximately 40% low water use, 60% high water use plants, mostly drip irrigation. Only the turf is using sprinkler system irrigation, and the total area is roughly 5,000 square feet. You'll see that there is a special feature. There's a stormwater infiltration cell covering about 10% of the total irrigated area, meaning we're increasing our water budget by 2 gallons per square foot per season up to 17. And if you calculate that out using the calculations in attachment A, then you will arrive at roughly 16 gallons per square foot per season, which is within the landscape water budget allowance at this time. So just to give you a sense of what this looks like in practice. And next slide. Okay, so mulch. Mulch is important, as we all know. It can significantly reduce water loss from evaporation and wind. Some studies suggest that mulch can reduce plants' water demand by as much as 25%. Our recommendation here is for mulch to be applied at a depth of 4 inches for organic mulch like shredded bark, and 2 inches for inorganic mulch like gravel or river rock. And then we're recommending an exception for some native plants. And this was based on stakeholder feedback because some native plants are more successful without mulch, actually. I know that access and cost of mulch was a big question for our stakeholders. And we learned that there's mulch available through the city landfill. There's also a tree company that sells mulch. Even the city has some mulch available on a first come, first served basis at different times of the year. So if you, just as an example, based on the numbers that we were able to find, if you were applying organic mulch at 4 inches to say 1,000 square feet, this works out to about $180 to $360 based on those available sources. And then irrigation system criteria. So the recommendations listed here would only apply to commercial and large scale developments, because when we heard from stakeholders that requiring installing irrigation systems in new single family homes doesn't actually always happen in Moab, and it could present an affordability issue. Also at this time, there are limited irrigation professionals operating in Moab, so the capacity might be limited if you were to require it on all new residential development. There's a number of different requirements listed here that get a little technical. Smart irrigation controllers, which are those that adjust based on local weather and microclimate data, they indicate that they save about 20% more water than traditional irrigation controllers. So there's a large potential savings with that recommendation. And we're also recommending dedicated landscape water meters for landscapes greater than 5,000 square feet, which gives large property owners and landscape managers more data on how much their landscape is using. Irrigation systems need to be designed basically to meet best practices. So prevent runoff, low head drainage, and overspray, all things that lead to water waste and inefficiency. And moving down the list, minimum pop-up height for sprinklers and turf grass should be 6 inches, which prevents sprinkler water from being blocked by overgrown turf grass. Overhead irrigation, shall not be permitted within 24 inches of any non-permeable surface. And this was a stakeholder recommendation, and that's to prevent overspray onto pavement. And then the last few are sort of technical on how to effectively install a sprinkler system to be as efficient as possible and provide head-to-head coverage and prevent other issues. So check valves or anti-drain valves are required. Operating pressure at each emission device is based on the manufacturer's recommended pressure range. Sprinklers within a zone must have matched precipitation rates, and then a pressure regulation valve is installed and maintained by the consumers. And moving right along.
We have about 3 minutes, Lindsay.
Okay, these ones are quick. Firewise landscaping, it's a little outside the scope of our original WaterWise standards, but Firewise based practices came up in conversation with stakeholders. So we did some research into Utah State University's forestry guidelines and came up with these recommendations listed here, specifically for properties in the wildland urban interface. So avoid fire-prone plant materials and highly flammable mulches, plant widely spaced, low-growing, non-resinous shrubs 2 to 3 feet away from the house. And then if planting new trees, plant small maturing ones at least 15 feet away from structures. Maintenance, critical to plant health and water demand management once a landscape is installed. So all irrigation systems must be maintained, including backflow assembly testing, which I know the city already has code language around. Leak repair, head adjustment, all replacement plants must conform to the city's plant list and landscaping standards, assuming those are adopted. And then recommended turf mowing height of 3.5 inches. This is because some studies suggest that turf that's a little taller develops a deeper root system and uses less water. And I will pause there.
Thanks, Lindsay. And definitely we'll open up for questions now, and just wanted to reiterate that more detail on all those recommendations are in the meeting packet that was sent out, including some justification, stakeholder feedback, current standards, and why we're recommending the ones we are. So with that, we'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
Great, thank you guys. Very, very thorough and excellent presentation. So if you could just drop your shared screen and council, questions for these guys on the options, what options you think make sense, what options you think don't make sense for our area. Thoughts? Ronnie.
So thanks to the 4 of you. And one of my questions, if you could answer after this, is just if we have questions, because I think we all have a lot to digest here afterwards, is there one of you that it makes the most sense to email, or just should we email the group of you? So anyway, think about that. But one of my first questions was, so I read through it and I probably just haven't retained enough detail. So this is probably a dumb question, but when I think about the non-living permeable ground cover item, number 2 versus number 8, mulch. Is there a reason mulch gets its own separate item? Because mulch is considered one of the non-living permeable ground covers, right? I mean, I like mulch, but I just, I was wondering if I could consolidate since I'm having trouble choosing between the 11.
I'll jump in there. Yes, mulch is certainly included in what we consider non-living ground covers, but it doesn't, non-living ground covers can go beyond what we would consider mulch. So like cobblestone pavers, for example, could be a non-living ground cover. So the mulch recommendations are getting specifically at that volume that you'd want to see applied to be effective as a water savings tool for those specific inorganic and organic mulches. Does that answer your question? Sorry, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and then kind of related to that, just because we have, carbon reduction goals, are there any rules of thumb, or or does it vary very much on your location? Like Moab is, relatively rural in terms when you do try to figure out of those non-permeable ground covers, which might have a larger carbon footprint.
Great question. I don't know if John and Victoria want to jump in. I think that's something we probably need to do some more digging on, but we could come back to you with some research. Oh, and to answer your first question, I think you can feel free to email all of us, and we'll be sure to I'm looking for a chat. Maybe there's not, but we'll make sure we give our emails to Mila to pass them on.
Okay, yeah, I'll let somebody else on the council jump in, but two other things I was thinking just from reading it was there's some terminology I'm not clear on, or the layperson might not be clear on. So, usually in our code, we do have a definition section, but maybe when I email you guys, I'll send you those terms that I wasn't quite so clear on. And I think the other question was, it does say, I know in the document, but I didn't retain it quite so well. If I decide I really like the water budget, just remind me kind of what cancels what out. I think that cancels out the turf limits, right? Was there some other crossover I should keep in mind?
Yeah, so related to the terminology, we would certainly be creating an extensive definition section for whatever options and terms end up, that council ends up wanting to move forward with. And that would be accompanied by sort of redlining of existing code. So this is, kind of the first step in that process. And then for your second question, if we were to go with a water budget approach, we think that the most natural options to sort of take off the table at that point would be part of the turf limits section that specifies the 10% or 200 square foot cap. And then also I'm looking for numbers, the water-wise plant requirement that specifies the 50% selected water-wise material.
All right, who else?
I'll go.
Yep.
Thanks for that great presentation that answered some of my questions, and you already answered some that funneled through Mila. So for feedback, I'd say that I support 1, 2, and 3. I think those make sense for Moab. Just one clarification on 7. It seems like the special features include non-irrigated permeable areas. So if I'm understanding that correctly, basically anything that isn't paved, basically any part of the lot that isn't paved or under a building would be included. So am I understanding that correctly? And then you just average the water use of everything, whether it's non-irrigated permeable or planted or whatever, as long as it's not paved.
That is correct. So we're look at non-irrigated permeable area as a special feature that could basically allow you to get an increase in your water budget to incentivize sort of the reduction of the more of those paved surfaces.
Okay. But I don't know, it's potentially simpler than it sounds if it includes everything that isn't paved.
Yeah, to your point, for the special features, we also certainly want to consider limiting how much your water budget can bump up. So let's say, you're doing 50% non-permeable area. That doesn't mean you get an additional 10, gallons per square foot. If anything, we'd go up, to 10% or 15%. But I can see why that might be problematic and why that might actually be confusing to folks. So it's something we could consider removing, certainly.
Okay, I'm not inclined to remove it. I'm just inclined to make it as easy to understand as possible. But in general, I like the flexibility that offers relative to 5. In terms of the plant list, it seems like if it can be maintained and comprehensive as possible, it seems like a good thing. But Moab is a smaller city with more limited staff than some other cities that it looks like you're referencing. So just long-term, I'm not sure if that will get updated as much as some gardeners might like to reflect the new plants that are constantly being developed. So just something to bear in mind. I'm happy to hear that edible crops will be excluded. The council has gotten some community feedback on that recently in response to this plan. So I will pass that on to those commenters. And I'm glad to hear that there might be some education around smart timers in addition to requiring for residential, in addition to requiring them, because it seems like many existing irrigation systems, it seems like an easy swap with a little bit of encouragement. And sorry, I'm checking my notes. That's what I have. Thanks again for your work.
Anybody else? Luke or Tawny?
I don't really have any questions. I think everything's been presented in a pretty clear manner, but yeah, just to kind of echo what Kaylin had mentioned is that number 7 does seem like the most viable for us in terms of making it easily understandable and easily enforceable. But yeah.
Connie?
I don't really have any questions. I appreciate this presentation. It was basically easy to understand, and it helped me to kind of coalesce around some goals that we might want to, that we do want to implement. I'm a little concerned about how we monitor or enforce this. I realize it's new development and that that's easier, but if homeowners, glom onto this and they want to do all of these updates and they come to us and they say, how do we get more water in our water budget? That's the kind of things that I'm not quite sure how we're going to address.
All right. Anything from anybody else? Mila, what are our next steps here?
So this will be presented to the Planning Commission at their next meeting on Thursday. I think that's on Thursday. And then we will present it to the Water Board, and they've already seen the initial iteration and been part of the development of these recommendations as well, but we'll present it to them at their meeting in the beginning of March. And then we may do, hopefully we'll do a period of public outreach as well and make it available for public comment. And then all of that feedback will be incorporated into the final proposed recommendations, which will be written up as code amendments at that point, and then go through the public hearing code amendment process. So they would go to Planning Commission, then back to Council.
Timeline?
Well, since our last meeting for feedback would be at the beginning of March, then I would guess another couple months after that, most likely. I think Lindsay and John, did you have a final cutoff other than ours?
Not necessarily. So we're
Yeah.
flexible. We can incorporate feedback, and we're willing to spend the time to make sure it works. And so no real time constraint on our end.
Awesome. Yeah. So I would say probably June-ish.
Okay, that sounds great. And thank you guys so much for your presentation. Very good. A lot of work to do, a lot of education to do with the community. And these are all really good steps for our community to be taking to manage our water issues that we know are going to be coming. So thank you. And if are there any other comments or questions about any of the presentations that we received this afternoon? Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and thank everybody. More to come on these topics. Lots more to discuss on all 3 of these topics that we had today. And so this is not the end. We'll be hearing a lot more about these water issues coming up. So I'm going to go ahead and close the workshop for now, and we will convene back at 6 o'clock. You need to, council members and staff, we need to go out of this Zoom and then reconnect through the Zoom for the regular city council meeting at 6 o'clock. So thanks, everybody, and we'll see you again very soon.